Welcome back. We left off the last video with a new front wheel and new front end parts made on a CNC. As part of that front end update, the stock CX500 rotors had a significant offset and wouldn't really work with the new setup. So I grabbed some rotors in the shop, but these were about a 1/4 inch too large in diameter, so I bolted them together and machined them on the lathe to make them a little smaller. One additional part that was still needed in the front end is the torque bar. As a part of my unique leading link anti-dive front end, which I'll do a separate video on, this bar creates the anti-dive effect of the system. Here you see how they fit into the caliper mounts. These are made from 1-inch square solid steel stock. I machined a groove into each side so they form an I-beam type profile, and rounded both ends. Back in the shop, building motors involved meticulously building a single motor at a time, start to finish, in this build room. Most of the parts, though, were spread all over the 10,000 square foot shop, and assembly involved spending half the day roaming about the shop picking parts out. As production manager, I pushed for updating the production line, which involved revamping this whole build room and getting most of the parts into it. We painted it white, added lots of shelves, and moved in more benches. While we didn't have the volume that made an assembly line worthwhile, at least the builds could progress in reasonable stages, and all the parts for that stage were a mere outstretched arm away. I started building my first engine around this time, a fully polished build. And I worked on quite a few different motors. Here the build room comes together quite nicely with all the parts organized in bins on the shelves. The wrinkle black and gray motors were quite popular, but the polished motors really remain my favorite still. Not too long after this, our machinist left, taking his nice pair of Haas VF2 CNC's with him. And soon after that, we had to move to a new shop as well, as the building owner wanted their shop back. Here, my Akira Bike Project prototype is loaded up in a trailer for a move again. We found a new space that was close by, but quite a bit smaller. I put my space maximization skills to the test and modeled and planned the whole shop out. We got a bunch of used storage racks, and those 8-foot steel benches from our build room fit perfectly between them, leaving plenty of storage space above the benches. Those red benches were steel and each weighed about 800 pounds. They were not fun to move. Here we have about half the stuff moved in, and viewed from the other side of the shop. The racks go up about 20 feet. It's a pretty tall ceiling. Before we had everything set up, we learned we had to move our engine castings in as well, which were in a different storage place in a different state. There were about 30 of these pallets, 4 feet by 4 feet each, about 3 feet tall, and weighing 1,200 to 1,600 pounds each. It was so much moving, so many heavy things. So I rebuilt the build room that I just built. It was a bummer moving across country, and then having to move again so soon after that. And of course, no bike work is getting done during all this moving. Finally, we got the shop set up. Though smaller, I had more freedom in the new shop, and managed to get some casting done. I picked up this nice, large, legitimate ceramic crucible, and then made a handy steel cage for it. It was a bit large for my kiln, but it still worked fine. Here's the pattern and the aluminum that will be melted for the casting. There's a few used pistons in the mix, and a few of my triangular ingots. It had been a while since I poured a casting, and so this was not one of my best. I actually caught the shop vac hose on fire, leaving it extruding too far out over the pour, and I had to stop mid-pour and then resume again. And here is the pour result. Get it? Pour result? Anyway, it didn't come out great, but it should be sufficient for my purposes. This isn't actually going on the bike, but it is part of a tool needed to make a part for the bike, which you'll see more about later on. We eventually got a new CNC at the shop, a brand spanking new Haas VF2 with a 5th axis trunnion. This is about a $150,000 machine. Well, since our machinist had left, I would be the one running it. And I'd barely done anything on a CNC at this point in time. And that was under close supervision by our machinist. But I love a good challenge, and I dived right in, devouring YouTube tutorials, articles, books, and everything I could find on the subject. And of course, I had to pose in front of it with my bike. I started building engines in the new shop again. Here's a beautiful pair of polished motors. I had to pose with them, of course, as well. I next worked on a significant update to the fork. While my fork was sufficient for a rolling chassis, I was concerned it lacked the strength and stiffness necessary for riding conditions and, more importantly, extreme braking. I modeled the fork up in SolidWorks so I could run finite element analysis on it. With FEA, you can get a reasonable approximation of how your design will respond to the forces and if it will fail. Under extreme braking, the forks could be loaded with up to the weight of the entire bike, which I'm aiming at about 1,000 pounds for the prototype, wet, with fuel, oil, etc., and with the rider. After numerous revisions, I got the safety factor to 1.99, which means you could expect it to handle about 2,000 pounds before failing. First, I wanted to close this gap up here where the outer fork tubes weren't quite as long as the inner fork tubes. This is after some modification that was made to the fork earlier. I cut the tubes, then squared their ends and brought them down to size on the lathe. And here's where those tube collars ended up. Onto the next piece, the half tube. This will get welded between the upper and lower T's of the fork, and has a slightly larger diameter than the existing upper suspension mount. Here I am marking the source tube using some parallel bars along the midline for cutting in half. I cut these on the milling machine to ensure a nice straight cut. Here are the two halves after cutting. And here you can see how they will cradle the existing suspension mounts. And here's the collar and half tube temporarily held onto the fork with magnets, showing where they'll get welded on. It's looking pretty good. After some additional rounds of modeling and simulations for the fork, I added triangulated gussets. These added about 3 pounds of weight, but increased the safety factor from 2 to 4.5. I later cut triangles out of the plates to drop it to a FOS of about 4. Cutting the triangular holes out retains most of the strength and stiffness, but removes a large portion of the weight. Ideally, the thick plates that make up the fork itself could have triangulated holes as well, but I don't feel that's really necessary at this point in the prototype. But how do I cut those plates out? Well, they need to be pretty accurate, really more accurate than I can do by hand with my plasma cutter. If I cut them by hand, I would need to spend quite a lot of time grinding them to get them right as well. If I only had a CNC plasma cutter, I thought. Well, wait, I have a plasma cutter and a CNC. So I attached my plasma cutter to a long steel beam that was attached to the 5th axis in the CNC. Voila, CNC plasma cutter. After some changes at Crazy Horse, I decided it was best to move to a new shop. I found a great deal on a shop that was a walking distance away, which made the move, another move, not quite as bad. Here's the Akira bike getting ready to be moved. The new workshop is 1,600 square feet, has a small kitchen, bathroom, office, and mezzanine. I'd already been in Seattle over 2 years by now, and hadn't even unpacked most of my things. This shop became the first chance I got for that. I brought out the benchtop milling machine and benchtop lathe, and all the benches, crates, and all my other tools that had never even been unpacked yet. With the new shop space, I'm finally able to unpack my books. I'm quite the bibliophile and was definitely frustrated every day these were locked up. And here specifically are my motorcycle and many of my design-related books. The most valuable have certainly been the top shelf middle 3, Tony Foles' Motorcycle Handling and Chassis Design, and John Bradley's 2 books, The Racing Motorcycle, A Technical Guide for Constructors Volume 1 and 2. If you're thinking about designing and building a bike, especially one with any unique properties, definitely start with these 3 books. The shop was close enough that I could walk the bike to it. With the help of my friend, we pushed it over to the new shop. I remained on great terms with Crazy Horse, but it was really nice to have my own shop again. Just trying to maintain a functional stocked workshop is a significant struggle throughout this project. The bike is looking good in its new home, and now it's time to set everything else up.
Well, thank you everyone. Thanks for watching. That is it for the Road So Far series, where we recapped all the previous updates on this journey. I hope you enjoyed that series. I really liked making it. I'm getting into this video making thing. It's pretty awesome. A little more time consuming than I had originally anticipated, but I'm getting better at it. It has been an interesting journey, as you've seen from following along. Quite a roller coaster ride, with ups and downs and twists and turns all along the way. But hey, pretty much anything meaningful that we do is going to be a similar story, right? It's very rarely a straight shot from start to finish. Smooth sailing is the exception, it's not the norm. If you're just tuning in now, please check out the playlist. You'll see everything from the get-go. I'd really like to thank everyone who stuck with this project from the start, though. I know it's been frustrating with all these builders whipping out these huge projects in days or weeks, but if you stick with it, I think you'll find it all worth it. It is a big project. It's no off-the-shelf quick build assembly of easy-to-make parts. I'm going with a fully functional high-performance vehicle designed from the ground up to take full advantage of the recumbent motorcycle platform, aesthetically inspired by Kaneda's ride in Akira. And I'm really striving to do true justice to the potential of this platform. So I hope you appreciate that. I really thank you all for sticking with this project for so long. Please leave a comment down below. Let me know when you got into it and what it's meant to you and how you've been liking following the journey. In the next video, we are on to the new stuff. So I'm pretty excited to start sharing this stuff. Stay tuned. As always, please like, subscribe, and share. And if you got any questions on the build or the project, please leave a comment down below. Thank you, everyone.